In the bustling streets and vibrant markets of Nigeria, a silent struggle takes place every day. It's the struggle for a living wage, a wage that allows individuals to not just survive, but to thrive. The question of what constitutes a fair wage in Nigeria is a complex one, entangled with political considerations, economic realities, and social inequalities. For decades, the minimum wage has been a point of contention, with workers demanding better compensation and the government grappling with the potential economic consequences of significant wage hikes. This ongoing debate highlights the delicate balance that must be struck between ensuring a decent standard of living for workers and fostering economic growth. At the heart of this issue lies the fundamental question: what should a worker be paid for their time and effort? Should it be enough to simply cover basic necessities like food and shelter, or should it also provide for education, healthcare, and a degree of financial security? The answers to these questions are far from simple, as they are influenced by a multitude of factors, including the cost of living, inflation rates, and the overall health of the economy. In Nigeria, a country with a large informal sector and widespread poverty, the minimum wage debate takes on even greater significance, as it directly impacts the lives of millions of its citizens. The debate over minimum wage is not just about numbers, it's about human dignity and the right to a decent standard of living. It's about ensuring that those who contribute their labor to the economy are rewarded fairly and have the opportunity to build a better future for themselves and their families. As Nigeria continues to grapple with this complex issue, it is imperative that all stakeholders, including the government, labor unions, and the private sector, engage in constructive dialogue to find a solution that benefits everyone. The pursuit of a fair wage is not just an economic imperative, it is a moral one that goes to the very heart of a just and equitable society.
To understand the current state of the minimum wage debate in Nigeria, it's crucial to delve into its historical context. Since the introduction of a national minimum wage in 1979, the country has seen numerous adjustments to this baseline pay. However, these adjustments have not always kept pace with the rising cost of living, leading to a steady erosion of purchasing power for Nigerian workers. The minimum wage, initially set at 10 naira per month, has undergone several revisions over the decades, with varying degrees of success in meeting the needs of workers. In the early years following independence, Nigeria's economy experienced a period of relative prosperity, fueled by oil revenue. This economic boom allowed for more generous minimum wage increases, which helped to improve the living standards of many Nigerians. However, this period of economic growth was short-lived, and by the 1980s, the country was facing a severe economic crisis. Structural Adjustment Programs, SAPs, implemented at the behest of international financial institutions, led to widespread austerity measures, including cuts to public spending and wage freezes. The impact of these policies on the minimum wage was significant. With inflation soaring and wages stagnating, the purchasing power of Nigerian workers plummeted. The minimum wage, once a tool for ensuring a decent standard of living, became woefully inadequate in the face of economic hardship. This period marked a turning point in the relationship between the government, labor unions, and the private sector, as workers became increasingly vocal in their demands for better pay and working conditions. The struggle to maintain a living wage in the face of economic turmoil has been a recurring theme in Nigeria's history. As the country continues to navigate the complexities of a globalized economy, the minimum wage debate remains a potent symbol of the challenges faced by many developing nations. Balancing economic growth with social equity remains a key challenge for Nigerian policymakers, and the minimum wage will undoubtedly continue to be a central issue in this ongoing debate. One of the most pressing issues surrounding the minimum wage in Nigeria is its inability to keep pace with inflation. While the naira has experienced periods of relative stability, it has also been plagued by devaluation and fluctuations in value. This volatility makes it extremely difficult for a fixed minimum wage to maintain its purchasing power over time. As the cost of goods and services rises, the real value of the minimum wage decreases, leaving workers struggling to afford even the most basic necessities. This erosion of purchasing power is further exacerbated by Nigeria's dependence on imports for many essential goods. Fluctuations in global commodity prices and exchange rates can have a significant impact on the cost of living in Nigeria. For example, a sudden increase in the price of imported rice or fuel can quickly eat away at the already limited budgets of minimum wage earners. This vulnerability to external economic shocks highlights the need for a more dynamic and responsive approach to setting the minimum wage. The struggle to keep the minimum wage in line with inflation has led to a situation where many Nigerian workers are trapped in a cycle of poverty. Despite working full-time, they are unable to earn enough to cover their basic needs, let alone provide for their families or invest in their future. This situation not only undermines the well-being of individuals and families, but also has broader implications for the Nigerian economy as a whole. A workforce struggling to make ends meet is less productive, less likely to invest in education and skills development, and more vulnerable to exploitation. Addressing the issue of inflation and its impact on the minimum wage is therefore not just a matter of social justice, but also a matter of economic imperative. Finding a sustainable solution that ensures a decent standard of living for all Nigerians is crucial for unlocking the country's full economic potential. In recent years, there has been growing pressure from labor unions and civil society organizations to significantly increase the minimum wage in Nigeria. They argue that the current minimum wage is no longer a living wage, meaning it is insufficient to cover the basic costs of living in most parts of the country. Rising food prices, transportation costs, and housing expenses have placed immense pressure on low-income earners, pushing many further into poverty. The push for a living wage is not just about survival, it's about ensuring that workers can afford a decent quality of life. Labor unions have been at the forefront of advocating for a substantial increase in the minimum wage. They argue that a higher minimum wage would not only improve the lives of millions of workers, but also stimulate economic growth by boosting consumer spending. They point to the fact that a significant portion of the Nigerian population lives below the poverty line, and a higher minimum wage would inject much-needed cash into the economy. Furthermore, they argue that a living wage would reduce income inequality, which has been identified as a major obstacle to sustainable development in Nigeria. The demands for a living wage are not limited to urban areas. Rural communities, often dependent on agriculture and informal sector activities, also face significant economic challenges. The rising cost of fertilizers, transportation, and other inputs has made it increasingly difficult for farmers and small business owners to make a living. A higher minimum wage, they argue, would provide a much-needed boost to rural economies and help to reduce poverty in these areas. The push for a living wage in Nigeria reflects a growing global movement for economic justice. As the gap between the rich and poor continues to widen in many parts of the world, there is a growing recognition that current economic systems are failing to deliver inclusive and sustainable growth. The demand for a living wage is a call for a more equitable distribution of wealth, and a recognition that the dignity of work must be reflected in the wages paid to those who perform it. While the need for a higher minimum wage is widely acknowledged, the Nigerian government faces a complex set of challenges when considering any significant increase. One of the primary concerns is the potential impact on inflation. There is a fear that a sudden and substantial increase in the minimum wage could lead to a surge in prices, as businesses pass on the increased labor costs to consumers. This, in turn, could erode the purchasing power of the very people the wage increase is intended to help, leading to a wage price spiral. Another major concern is the potential impact on employment, particularly in the small and medium-sized enterprise (SME) sector. SMEs, which form the backbone of the Nigerian economy, operate on tight margins and may not have the capacity to absorb a significant increase in labor costs. This could lead to job losses, particularly among low-skilled workers, exacerbating the very problems the minimum wage increase is meant to address. The government must carefully consider the potential trade-offs between improving the lives of workers and ensuring the sustainability of businesses, particularly in a context of high unemployment. Furthermore, the government must also contend with its own fiscal constraints. Nigeria, like many developing countries, faces significant challenges in raising revenue and managing its public finances. A substantial increase in the minimum wage for public sector workers would have significant implications for the government's wage bill, potentially requiring cuts in other areas of public spending or an increase in taxes. Balancing these competing demands requires careful economic planning and a nuanced understanding of the potential consequences of policy decisions. The government's dilemma highlights the complexities of minimum wage policy in developing economies. While the need to improve the livelihoods of workers is paramount, policymakers must also consider the potential impact on inflation, employment, and public finances. Finding a balance that ensures both social equity and economic stability is a delicate task, requiring careful analysis, consultation with stakeholders, and a willingness to adapt policies to changing circumstances.